Unova's legendary Pokémon form one of the richest and most symbolically layered collections of myths in the entire Pokémon world, a tapestry woven from ancient kingdoms, clashing ideals, half-forgotten heroes, and creatures whose presence shaped the very identity of the region. Unlike many regions where the legends revolve around creation itself or distant cosmic forces, Unova's stories feel deeply human, intertwined with morality, belief, and the consequences of ambition. The legends here do not simply exist above the people, they walk beside them, influencing their decisions, their history, and even the architecture of their cities. When trainers first step into Unova, they feel that weight immediately. The region is modern, bursting with technology and industry, yet beneath that polished surface lie stories stretching back thousands of years, stories centered on Pokémon, whose very existence turned kingdoms to dust and lifted civilizations to glory. At the heart of these legends is the story of twin heroes and the three dragons tied to them, Reshiram, Zekrom, and Kyurem. Their tale is one of unity fractured into duality, where a single dragon split into two opposing forces and left behind an empty remnant of what once was. The two brothers who shaped the region believed in different ideals, not unlike how people today still differ in philosophy. One championed truth, unwavering, harsh, radiant. The other fought for ideals, aspirational, passionate, electric with possibility, and when their conflict grew beyond reconciliation, the dragon that served them could no longer maintain its form. In a moment described in ancient texts as both tragic and inevitable, it split into two beings that embodied those clashing philosophies. But something else happened too, something quiet, less spoken about. When the unified dragon's essence tore apart, the leftover shell did not vanish. It became something cold, formless, and incomplete, a Pokémon defined not by power but by absence. That being was Kyurem, the frozen husk waiting for warmth that would never return. Even before modern historians pieced the legend together, the people of Lacunosa Town felt the truth deep in their bones. Their tradition of building walls around their settlement wasn't rooted in superstition but memory, the inherited fear that something in the night, something colder than any winter, prowled the edges of their home. They believed Kyurem descended from the sky as a star that burned cold instead of hot, leaving behind unnatural frost. While the truth is more complex, the symbolism remains. Kyurem is the embodiment of loss, the result of a power so great that even being shattered couldn't erase it completely. Its presence in the giant chasm feels less like a monster's lair and more like a wound in the region itself, a place where history still aches. Reshiram and Zekrom, however, represent the living halves of that once whole being. Reshiram's fire burns purely, a flame said to reveal truth by scorching away illusion. When it moves, its tail turbine roars with a sound ancient scholars described as the voice of honesty breaking through lies. In contrast, Zekrom carries the crackling intensity of idealism, a thunderous desire to build a world not as it is, but as it could be. Its electricity isn't chaotic, it's focused, driven by purpose. Together, they form a pair that defines Unova's reflection on morality. Truth without ideals becomes harsh and empty. Ideals without truth become impossible dreams. But together, they create balance, a concept at the core of the region's philosophy. These dragons have influenced Unova across centuries. Old murals in relic-like ruins show Reshiram lighting the path for ancient scholars, its flame illuminating stone libraries filled with future leaders. Other carvings depict Zekrom standing beside black-armored warriors who fought not out of greed but justice, using ideals as their armor. Such depictions give historians clues that these Pokemon weren't always distant figures of myth. At times, they were companions of kings, guardians of civilizations, and markers of major turning points. Every emergence of Reshiram or Zekrom in recorded history aligns with periods of social upheaval, moments where the region had to redefine itself. Yet these three dragons are only the beginning of Unova's vast legendary ecosystem. The Swords of Justice, Cobalion, Terrakion, Virizion, and later Keldeo represent another major pillar of the region's lore. Their story is rooted not in kingdoms or ideals, but in compassion born from catastrophe. Long ago, a massive conflict between humans and Pokemon devastated forests, mountains, and rivers across Unova. Many Pokemon were displaced, and some species neared extinction. From this chaos emerged three Pokemon who refused to witness suffering without action. Cobalion, whose steely composure masked a deep protective instinct. Terrakion, whose raw strength shielded the weak from destruction. And Virizion, whose graceful speed allowed it to divert danger before it struck. Together, these three became known as the Guardians of the Lost when they discovered a lone young Pokemon wandering the ruins of a burnt forest. A small Keldeo trembling among ash and smoke, they did not turn away. They raised it, trained it, and taught it how to channel its potential into something that could protect rather than destroy. Keldeo's own legend centers on learning self-control, mastering fear, and stepping into the identity shaped by mentorship. Its transformation into the resolute form symbolizes personal growth, the moment when inner potential solidifies into something certain. The entire saga of the Swords of Justice echoes a simple truth deeply embedded in Unova's culture. Strength is not the ability to dominate, but the ability to protect. The forces of nature, Tornadus, Thundurus, and Landorus, represent yet another layer of Unova's mythic heritage, one rooted in the balance of natural forces. Tornadus and Thundurus embody the destructive aspects of nature, swirling storms and booming thunder that can devastate farmland and communities. Ancient Unovans believed these two would rampage across the skies unchecked if not for Landorus, a guardian who descended from the clouds to bring harmony. Landorus's presence calmed storms, revitalized soil, and restored fields, turning barren land into fertile ground. Even today, farmers in the region leave offerings during harvest season, echoing traditions centuries old. This trio shows how Unova understands nature not as a force to be conquered, but a force that requires respect and equilibrium. Unova's legendary roster continues with Meloetta, a Pokemon woven deeply into the region's artistic and cultural identity. Meloetta's graceful presence inspires creativity, influencing music, poetry, and dance. In its pirouette form, it becomes a dancer whose movements tell stories older than language itself. In its aria forme, its voice carries melodies said to calm even the most turbulent souls. Ancient theaters across Unova were built to honor Meloetta's blessing, and performers believed that if they danced long enough under moonlight, the Pokemon might appear to guide their choreography. The relationship between Meloetta and human culture reveals something profound. In Unova, art isn't just recreation, it's sacred, a bridge connecting past to present. Then there is Victini, the victory Pokemon, believed to grant limitless energy and ensure success to those who befriend it. Unlike many legendaries tied to grand-scale events, Victini's lore feels intimate, almost childlike in its optimism. It is said to bring warmth to anyone it touches, warming hearts as easily as it generates energy. The ancient inhabitants of Liberty Garden built a tower to honor Victini after it helped them survive a harsh era of conflict. Victini represents hope, small bright, and persistent, a flame that never goes out. And finally, Genesect, a relic of a prehistoric age forcibly reshaped into something new. Its story is one of conflict between natural history and human ambition. Revived and modified by Team Plasma scientists, Genesect carries both ancient instincts and artificial enhancements, making it a living link between two completely different eras. Some believe that deep down, beneath its steel plating and upgraded cannon, lies the soul of a Pokémon that once walked the Earth millions of years ago. The tension between what it was and what it has become makes Genesect one of the most emotionally complex Pokémon in Unova's legendary lineup, a creature caught between past and future. Together, these legends weave a narrative unlike any other region, one defined not merely by grandeur, but by philosophy. Unova's legends are stories about truth and ideals, guardianship and protection, nature and responsibility, art and emotion, hope and transformation. They are reminders that power itself is neutral. It is the intention behind that power that shapes history. And so, as you drift deeper into the calm of the night, the legends of Unova continue to unfold. Dragons swirling through ancient skies, warriors forging bonds through compassion, spirits dancing between moonbeams, and forgotten relics of time awakening beneath the soil. In every corner of the region, there is a story waiting to be told. A gentle glow beneath the surface, a reminder that even the grandest forces can speak in quiet voices when the world grows still. The legends of Unova continue to unfold like an ancient tapestry woven with threads of conflict, creation, and quiet meaning, each mythical figure casting a long shadow over the region's history. To understand the legends of Unova, one must move slowly through the stories, because this region's myths aren't simple tales of gods and monsters. They're stories born from emotions, choices, and the fractures between ideals. This is a region where history isn't written in stone alone, but in the memories of its legendary Pokémon, each of them carrying the weight of a moral lesson. As you sink deeper into the lore, the world of Unova begins to feel less like a landscape and more like a living memory preserved by these guardians of truth and conviction, the twin dragons, whose presence lingers over every corner of Unova, set the tone for what legendary power means here. Reshiram and Zekrom are not beings who rule with raw strength, but with philosophies, truth, and ideals that ripple through Unova's cultures. Their ancient story is not about domination, but disagreement. They were once a single dragon, a being of perfect harmony, until the brothers who commanded it drifted apart in their beliefs. Rather than choosing one side over the other, the dragon split in two, becoming Reshiram to support truth and Zekrom to support ideals. Even though these dragons now exist separately, they never fight out of hatred, but out of a conflicting desire to protect what each believes is right. Their story sets the stage for the emotional depth that defines Unova's mythology, where even legends struggle with the consequences of division. Kyurem stands apart from them, not as a rival, but as the empty shell left behind when the original dragon split. The coldness that surrounds it is not evil, but absence and echo of what once was. Its icy aura feels less like aggression and more like sorrow frozen in place. Many believe Kyurem wanders Unova, searching for the pieces of itself it lost long ago. This gives the abandoned giant a tragic presence unmatched by most legendary Pokémon, as though it carries an unfinished sentence within its icy frame. Its cavern, frozen and still, feels like a moment of time trapped between what once existed and what can never fully return. The chill that fills that cave isn't frightening, it's mournful, a quiet reminder that even immense power suffers from incompleteness. Deep within the marshes and rivers of the region, another trio keeps its eternal watch. Cobalion, Terrakion, and Virizion move like wandering guardians whose purpose is rooted not in creation myths, but in protection. They represent the will to intervene when balance tips too far. Cobalion leads with calm authority, its resolve hardened through centuries of experience. Terrakion embodies raw strength, a barrier against destruction, while Virizion represents grace and swift retaliation. Together, the trio feels like three expressions of justice: unyielding protection, powerful resistance, and strategic defense. Their steps across Unova's wild landscapes left stories behind in every forest, cave, and plain. Travelers once said that seeing even the faint silhouette of one of these guardians meant that peace was being preserved quietly, without anyone needing to notice the danger that had been prevented. Keldeo exists within this trio, not as an equal, but as a symbol of growth. It is the student, the apprentice, shaped by the virtues of all three swords. When Keldeo learned to stand firm in the presence of fear, its power blossomed from innocence into mastery. Its transformation into the resolute form wasn't about strength, but about courage, the willingness to face overwhelming difficulty without retreat. That moment of growth echoes one of Unova's most enduring lessons: that legends are not born from perfection, but from persistence. Even among legendary Pokémon, Keldeo stands out as a reminder that power can come from vulnerability, that a creature unsure of itself can still become something remarkable. Unova's skies and storms are home to yet another set of myths, carried by the roar of thunder and the whisper of spring winds. Tornadus, Thundurus, and Landorus form a cycle of nature's emotions, movement, disruption, and restoration. Tornadus brings swirling winds that reshape landscapes, a wanderer whose presence is always felt before it's seen. Thundurus crackles with wild, untamed force, thunder breaking open the sky wherever it roams. Landorus, the bringer of balance, calms the chaos they leave behind, fertilizing land and restoring what the other two unsettle. Their story is not one of rivalry, but of necessary imbalance and the return that follows. They are less like deities and more like reflections of natural cycles' disorder, intensity, and renewal playing out in an eternal loop. In their Therian forms, these beings feel even older, almost ancient in posture and presence. Tornadus becomes a bird-like spirit whose wings carry the memory of storms. Thundurus shifts into a serpentine shape, embodying lightning that coils and strikes with precision rather than fury. Landorus assumes the stance of a wise guardian, standing tall as though shaped from the very soil he protects. The shift between forms feels like the wind changing direction, not a transformation of personality, but a revelation of deeper truth. These Therian forms remind everyone in Unova that power is always changing, even when its essence stays the same. Beyond the more famous legends lie the quieter mysteries of Unova, the ones whispered about in ruins and ancient chambers. The abyssal ruins off the coast of Undella Bay remain one of the most haunting archaeological sites in the region. The inscriptions inside reference great kings, forgotten empires, and a civilization that faded long before the modern era. No confirmed link ties these ruins directly to legendary Pokémon, yet the presence of something grand and untold lingers there, like a myth waiting patiently to be remembered. Divers who enter describe hearing faint sounds, almost like echoes of a world long underwater. The further one descends, the stronger the feeling becomes that the ruins are not empty, they are simply quiet, guarding truths too old to reveal easily. Another layer of Unova's mythical landscape lies in the dream world. and the Pokemon who bridged the gap between consciousness and imagination. Meloetta, whose songs once shaped hearts and memories, stands as one of the most emotionally resonant legends in the entire region. It embodies harmony, not just musical harmony, but the harmony between joy and sorrow, movement and stillness. In its aria forme, Meloetta sings melodies that soothe creation itself. In its pirouette forme, its steps echo the rhythm of ancient dances performed in Unova's eras of celebration. Everywhere Meloetta goes, it carries the warmth of nostalgia, stirring forgotten memories like dust rising in sunbeams. Legends say entire towns once gathered to hear its songs under the gentle glow of lantern light. Victini, the small yet powerful bearer of victory, completes the tapestry of Unova's legendary symbolisms. Unlike other mythical Pokemon whose stories revolve around creation or conflict, Victini's myth celebrates hope. It is believed to bring triumph, not through overwhelming might, but through unwavering spirit. Wherever Victini appears, energy rises, confidence grows, and the faint spark of possibility ignites even the most exhausted heart. The image of Victini emerging from the depths of Liberty Garden, an isolated island hidden away from the world, adds to its mystique. A creature so small, yet so powerful, living in solitude until it chooses to share its gift of boundless vigor. Its flame-like ears and bright eyes symbolize the kind of hope that warms rather than burns. Every legendary Pokemon in Unova carries a story of emotional weight rather than simple elemental force. Reshiram's truth, Zekrom's ideals, Kyurem's emptiness, the sword's justice, the force's balance, Victini's hope, and Meloetta's harmony all fit together like pieces of a vast emotional map. No other region's mythology is so defined by the internal struggles of its legends. Unova's stories feel human, shaped by feelings conflict between brothers, the desire to protect, the loneliness of incompletion, the wildness of storms, the growth of a child, the comfort of music, and the spark of hope that outlasts fear. And as night falls over the region, the presence of these legends seems to drift across the land like a soft breeze. The ruins stand silent beneath the moonlight. The forests sway gently where Cobalion once walked. Thunderheads gather far in the distance where Thundurus may be traveling. The cold wind from the north reminds travelers of Kyurem's sorrow. And somewhere, perhaps in the deepest calm of night, Meloetta sings a quiet melody lost to time, carried only by those who listen closely enough to feel the world breathe. The deeper you travel into the mysteries of Unova's legendary Pokemon, the more the region begins revealing itself as a land shaped not by coincidence, but by deliberate balance. Every legend, every ancient record, and every fragment of myth seems to feed into a larger tapestry, a story about ideals, truth, nature, order, chaos, and the consequences of desire. By the time you begin exploring the third layer of these legends, it becomes clear that Unova wasn't just given its pantheon of legendary Pokemon. It was built around them, molded by forces far older than the modern cities that now rise over its plains. One of the most fascinating threads in Unova's mythic landscape revolves around the existence of Pokemon whose stories were never meant to be loud, but instead slipped quietly through history. Take Landorus, for example, a Pokemon often overshadowed by the dramatic rivalry between Tornadus and Thundurus. Yet when you look closely, Landorus isn't simply the mediator of storms, but a figure revered as a quiet architect of prosperity. According to agricultural legends across eastern Unova, Landorus's presence enriched the soil, strengthened crop cycles, and allowed ancient settlements to flourish in places where food shortages once threatened survival. Farmers described seeing him appear at the edges of their fields during harsh seasons, pressing a single paw into the dry earth before disappearing. Weeks later, the soil would soften, the rains would stabilize, and the harvest would improve. Whether these stories are literal or exaggerated, they reflect a clear belief. Unova's lands are fertile not by chance, but because the forces governing them were once deeply intertwined with the region's survival. In contrast, Tornadus and Thundurus have always represented movement and disruption. Tornadus embodied the ever-changing winds, the shifting seasons, and the unpredictable nature of atmosphere itself. Thundurus embodied electrical storms, raw energy, and the kind of chaos that both destroys and nourishes the world. Their myths describe them less as villains and more as untamable natural forces, entities that operate according to instinct, not morality. The ancient people weren't trying to demonize the storm pair, they were describing the unpredictable physics of their environment. Landorus's role, then, becomes even clearer. Not a conqueror, but a negotiator between balance and disruption. When all three appear, storms might rage and winds might tear through plains, but the region eventually resets itself. The trio, in that sense, reflects the natural cycle of destruction and renewal that shaped Unova long before humans ever built their roads or bridges. As you continue through Unova's legends, another figure rises from its history with an even more elegant aura: Meloetta. At first glance, Meloetta's tale seems smaller in scale than the epics surrounding Reshiram or Zekrom, but its influence runs quietly through the cultural memory of the entire region. Ancient musicians believed that Meloetta's presence shaped the very style of Unovan music. It wasn't the creator of music itself, but the muse that helped it evolve, guiding rhythms, inspiring harmonies, and influencing melodies that echoed through castles, forests, and bustling towns over generations. Songs dedicated to Meloetta weren't just tributes, but attempts to recreate the elusive beauty of its voice. Even the stone carvings found in long-forgotten temples depict Meloetta with swirling notation around its figure, suggesting that music itself was once considered a sacred language capable of connecting people with the divine. In this way, Meloetta occupies a role in Unova's mythology no less important than the dragons. It represents the cultural heartbeat of the region. The legends surrounding Meloetta's ability to change forms add further depth to its mythic presence. It shifts between its aria formae, calm, melodic, and graceful, and its pirouette formae, a reflection of energetic rhythm and physical movement. For ancient Unovan storytellers, this duality became a metaphor for harmony between creativity and expression. They believed that Meloetta taught early civilizations not just how to create beauty, but how to move with it. Festivals honoring Meloetta often involved both song and dance, symbolizing a unity between sound and movement, or perhaps a unity between the emotional and physical worlds. During these celebrations, it was said that if people danced in complete synchrony with their surroundings, Meloetta might appear, not as a performer, but as a silent witness to the harmony humanity had achieved. Terrakion, Cobalion, and Virizion, the swords of justice, serve as another foundational pillar in Unovan mythology. Part of what makes them so compelling is not simply their strength, but the moral framework they embody. They weren't worshipped as deities or feared as threats. They were remembered as guardians who intervened only when the balance between humans and Pokémon was threatened. Their lore suggests a deep understanding of justice as a form of protection, not punishment. Cobalion, often described as the steel-hearted leader, understood the importance of firmness without cruelty. Terrakion, powerful and unwavering, represented the strength required to shield the vulnerable. Virizion embodied swift compassion, a reminder that justice must move with both empathy and precision. But their narrative becomes even more meaningful when you consider Keldeo, a symbol of potential, growth, and the ability to rise beyond one's origins. Ancient texts describe Keldeo not as a chosen figure, but as a Pokémon who chose itself. When the Swords of Justice found it injured, abandoned, and afraid, they didn't merely heal it, they taught it, guided it, and eventually honored its courage by welcoming it into their ranks. The moment Keldeo learned Secret Sword became more than just a milestone in its personal growth. It became a moral parable told across generations. The legend reminded people that justice wasn't about lineage or power, it was about the choices one makes, especially when faced with overwhelming adversity. The deeper into Unova's legends you journey, the more the theme of duality emerges, a consistent reflection of balance across every myth. Nowhere is this more evident than in the intertwined stories of Reshiram and Zekrom. These two dragons represent more than elemental forces of fire and electricity. They embody the philosophical pillars that shaped Unova, truth and ideals. Their stories capture the friction between how the world is and how one wants it to be. Their battles weren't just clashes of power, but debates between philosophies, each one believing its vision would lead Unova toward the right future. What makes their legend even more captivating is that neither Reshiram nor Zekrom is portrayed as right or wrong. Their conflict represents the tension necessary for growth, the idea that truth and ideals must challenge each other to refine the world. This narrative complexity is rare in Pokémon mythology. It presents the dragons not as embodiments of good and evil, but as forces that create progress through contrast. Their balance, represented by Kyurem, completes the trio. The emptiness left behind when truth and ideals become divided beyond reconciliation. Kyurem's cold power and broken form serve as a haunting reminder of the consequences of imbalance, a mythic warning woven into the region's storytelling. Genesect, another of Unova's legendary Pokémon, represents an entirely different kind of myth, one born not from ancient stories, but from technological ambition. Its lore stands apart because it directly involves human intervention. Long before Team Plasma re-engineered it, Genesect lived as a prehistoric predator whose mastery of its environment made it nearly unstoppable. When scientists resurrected it and fitted it with mechanical components, they created a living contradiction, a fusion of ancient instinct and modern technology. Genesect's existence raises moral questions within Unovan lore about the boundary between creation and control, nature and modification. Even its movements, described as both primal and eerily precise, reflect a creature caught between two eras. It is a living testament to the region's complicated relationship with progress. One of the quieter legends comes from the story of the ecosystem Pokémon, Victini. Though often associated with victory, its role in Unova's culture goes far beyond simple luck. Victini represents the spark of hope that allowed civilizations to rise from nothing. In battles, it generates limitless energy, but its mythic symbolism points to something much deeper, the belief that every great achievement in Unovan history started with a spark, a moment of inspiration that ignited ambition. Ancient carvings depicting Victini often show it hovering above torches or flames, hinting that civilizations viewed it not just as a bringer of victory, but as a keeper of motivation itself. Its hidden location on Liberty Garden reinforces its connection to freedom. The idea that success rooted in inspiration is always found far from oppression. And woven throughout these legends is the quiet understanding that Unova wasn't shaped by one god or one idea, but by a complex interplay of forces, each representing a different aspect of existence, chaos and order, emotion and intellect, destruction and growth, harmony and conflict. In this sense, Unova's legendary Pokemon function less like isolated myths and more like chapters in an overarching philosophical story. They represent a region grappling with the human condition, the longing for truth, the pull of ideals, the power of nature, and the consequences of ambition. As these stories continue to fade into the fabric of time, Unova remains a region defined not by its cities or landscapes, but by the living myths that still echo through its forests, ruins, and battlefields. Whether through the flash of Zekrum's lightning on a stormy night, or the faint whisper of Meloetta's song drifting through a quiet town square, the legends of Unova continue to breathe beneath the surface, ancient voices carried forward by anyone willing to listen. The legends of Unova continue to deepen the further you travel across the region, each myth revealing another layer of an ancient story that feels more like a living memory than a piece of distant history. Unova is a land shaped by ideals, truth, balance, and the mysterious forces that linger between them. Nowhere is this more apparent than in the tales surrounding its legendary Pokemon, who have left marks not only on the land itself, but also on the hearts and philosophies of the people who live there. Every town, every forest, and every cliffside holds a whisper of something ancient, something powerful, something that shaped the region long before modern trainers set foot on its soil. Among the earliest legends recorded in Unova are those describing a world torn between the desires of people and the harmony of nature. Long before the region's modern civilization emerged, its first inhabitants believed the world was guided by unseen spirits who watched over the elements. As time passed, these beliefs crystallized into the stories of the forces of nature: Tornadus, Thundurus, and Landorus, beings who governed the sky, storm, and earth. But the people of ancient Unova didn't see them as tyrants or harsh rulers. They saw them as reflections of the wild world itself, unpredictable, powerful, and necessary. The earliest known carvings of these beings show swirling cloud patterns etched into stone tablets, representing Tornadus's endless winds. Beside them are jagged lightning marks symbolizing Thundurus's violent storms, and deep grooves carved into the earth itself, representing Landorus's stabilizing presence. To the ancient people, these carvings were more than art. They were warnings and blessings intertwined. Tornadus could bring fertile winds, but also hurricanes. Thundurus could bring rain, but also disaster. Landorus could restore balance, but only when he chose to intervene. This triad formed a moral lesson about respecting nature, a lesson that echoes throughout Unova's history. These forces, however, were only part of the tapestry that shaped the region. Unova's spiritual heart lies not in storms or winds, but in the dragon myth that defines the region's philosophy. The tale of a single dragon splitting into two, Reshiram and Zekrom, is one of the most iconic and emotionally resonant stories in the entire Pokemon world. It's a legend woven into everything, from Unova's architecture to the values its people carry. The idea that truth and ideals were once united in one being has influenced generations, shaping how people perceive conflict, connection, and personal growth. This myth becomes even more compelling when you consider Kyurem, the hollow remnant of the original dragon. It is said that when the dragon split, its essence fractured into three distinct beings: the white dragon that embodied truth, the black dragon that embodied ideals, and the empty shell left behind. Kyurem represents the painful cost of division. It is the physical proof that when unity breaks, something is always lost. Ancient scholars believed Kurem was not evil but incomplete, a being trapped between forms, yearning not for destruction but for restoration. This belief is reflected in the legends that claim Kurem freezes everything around it, not out of malice, but because it cannot contain the cold emptiness within itself. The concept of oneness fractured appears repeatedly across Unova's folklore. Many historians believe this idea influenced the way people understood conflict. Instead of seeing disagreements as black and white struggles, they saw them as fractures of something once united. In that sense, the Unova dragons serve not as symbols of opposition, but as reminders that opposing beliefs often come from the same source. This deep philosophical thread is woven throughout the region, appearing in places like Opelucid City, where two different visions of the same place exist. One old and steeped in tradition, one modern and full of progress. Unova, at its core, is a region of duality seeking harmony. Traveling further into Unova's mythology reveals another layer of legendary beings tied not to elements or ideals, but to emotion and spirit. The trio known as the Swords of Justice, Cobalion, Terrakion, Virizion, and later their protege, Keldeo, represent a different kind of power. Their stories weren't born from natural disasters or cosmic forces. They were born from compassion. During ancient human conflicts, when villages were burned and forests destroyed, these Pokémon are said to have protected vulnerable Pokémon who fled the devastation. They weren't guardians of nature itself, like Landorus, nor were they embodiments of philosophy like the dragons. They were protectors of the innocent. The ruins scattered across Unova contain murals of 4 silhouettes standing between fire and frightened Pokémon, blades drawn, shielding the weak. These stories gave rise to a legend that the Swords of Justice would always appear when living creatures were oppressed or endangered. Their presence instilled hope and moral clarity in Unova's early inhabitants, teaching that true strength was not about power, but about using that power to protect others. This theme of moral courage can still be felt today in communities like Nakreen City, where art and culture thrive as expressions of emotional resilience. Cobalion, the leader of the group, was believed to embody the strength of resolve, unshakable and steady. Terrakion symbolized the power to break through oppression, shattering barriers both literal and symbolic. Virizion represented grace and compassion, the ability to move swiftly through chaos to offer protection. And Keldeo, the young warrior trained by the trio, symbolized hope, the idea that even the smallest and most uncertain being could grow into a protector by learning from the past. These legends emphasize that heroism is a choice, not an attribute. Anyone can become a sword of justice if they choose to act with courage and compassion. Yet the Swords of Justice are not the only beings tied to the emotions of Unova. Another set of legends speaks of Pokémon who watch the dreams of humans and Pokémon alike, otherworldly beings whose presence blurs the line between reality and imagination. One of the most fascinating of these is Victini, the victory Pokémon. Said to bring victory to any who share its bond, Victini is rumored to contain an infinite energy within its tiny body. Ancient stories claim it appeared during times of dire need, offering its energy to those who fought for peace. It was believed that Victini did not grant victory through force, but by amplifying the determination in the hearts of those it encountered. In the remote Liberty Garden, where Victini was once hidden, old carvings depict circles of fire surrounded by symbols for hope and unity. Historians believe Victini was not just a bringer of victory, but a symbol of renewal, a spark that reignited the spirit of a broken community. Its connection to endless energy hints at the idea that hope itself is eternal, passing from one person to another like a flame. Even now, those who visit Liberty Garden report feeling a strange warmth, as if the island itself remembers the presence of that small, powerful being. Another mysterious figure tied to the dream world of Unova is Meloetta, known for its ability to shift between graceful serenity and mesmerizing power. Its song was said to calm fierce Pokémon and sway the hearts of humans, restoring harmony wherever discord had taken root. Ancient accounts speak of Meloetta wandering through ruined cities after conflicts and singing songs that helped the land itself recover. Grass grew where its voice echoed, rivers flowed clearer. Pokémon who had been frightened or driven from their homes returned. The contrast between its aria and pirouette forms symbolizes the union of emotion and action, the ability to soothe and to fight when necessary for harmony. Beneath these legends lies another layer of mystery, one involving beings whose origins seem to stretch beyond the world itself. Genesect is perhaps the most unsettling example. Long before modern science, ancient texts alluded to a predator that ruled the skies, a creature feared even by mighty Pokémon. This being is believed to be the prehistoric form of Genesect, revived by Team Plasma and heavily altered through mechanical augmentation. Genesect represents a tragic intersection of nature and human interference. While its power is undeniable, its existence raises philosophical questions about the ethics of altering what time has left behind. Ancient drawings of the original creature show a sleeker, more organic being, a stark contrast to the armored predator it became. That loss of identity mirrors some of Unova's deeper themes, the danger of forcing evolution instead of allowing growth. Even the scattered ruins of Unova speak through silence about these ancient connections. The desert resort, where relics half buried in sand whisper of forgotten civilizations, holds clues about how people once communicated with legendary beings. Some tablets depict humans offering prayers to dragons. Others show scenes of natural disasters being calmed by powerful forces. The Relic Castle, with its spiral descent into shadow, symbolizes Unova's relationship with its own past, the attempt to understand what came before, even when the truth lies buried. Unova's legendary Pokémon aren't just characters in a story. They are reflections of the region's deepest values: truth and ideals, justice and compassion, stillness and storm, past and future. Every legend carries a lesson, and every story echoes the same message. Strength means nothing without purpose, and power means nothing without harmony. And so the region continues to be shaped by these myths, the ancient spirits who watch from wind, flame, dream, and shadow. Their presence lingers in every corner of Unova, in the rustling grass of Route 4, in the hushed halls of Dragon Spiral Tower, in the moonlit pathways near Lacunosa Town. Even now, travelers swear they feel something watching quietly from the distance, not with malice, but with memory, as if the legendary beings of Unova never truly leave. They simply wait, patient and eternal, for the next moment when the region needs them again. Among all the legends whispered across Unova, few carry the quiet weight of the forces of nature: Tornadus, Thunderous, and Landorus, beings whose presence shaped the region's earliest agricultural traditions and weather cycles long before written history began. As travelers moved across Unova's plains, they passed down stories not only of the storms and winds that battered the land, but of the guardian who settled them. And as the centuries unfolded, these legends intertwined with Unova's growing identity, turning myths into cultural truths. Even today, Farmers in small towns still speak in respectful tones when sudden winds sweep across the fields, as though remembering the spirits who once guided their ancestors. Unova's legendaries are unique because their lore connects directly to the human journey in the region. Unlike the myths in some regions, where gods act from distant heavens, the legends of Unova feel grounded. Stories of Pokémon who walked the same soil, shaped the same forests, and watched the same rivers grow. Take, for instance, Zekrom and Reshiram, whose story is told not through cosmic origins but through human conflict. They represent ideas, beliefs, and philosophies that once tore a kingdom apart. That kind of lore carries a different kind of weight. These Pokémon don't just symbolize power, they symbolize choices. And in a region as deeply rooted in history as Unova, that symbolism still echoes in every city standing today. Landorus, despite being part of a trio often associated with chaos and storms, holds a particularly gentle place in the hearts of many Unovans. While Tornadus and Thundurus clash through violent winds and crackling thunder, Landorus arrives as the one who restores balance. According to ancient tradition, farmers once left offerings of seeds and clay at the base of certain hills during early spring, hoping to invite Landorus's blessing for the planting season. The legend claimed that Landorus's presence enriched the soil and protected crops from storms. It's a myth, but one rooted in the real pattern Unovans observed. Winds settle, storms break, and calm returns. To early civilizations, that seemed like the influence of a guardian, one who understood the land as deeply as they did. The trio's Therian forms introduced new layers to their mythology. Tornadus transformed from a muscular, humanoid figure to a swift, bird-like spirit whose wings cut through the sky like blades of wind. Thundurus shifted into a soaring serpent of lightning, leaving trails of sparks across the clouds, and Landorus took on a guardian-like feline form, sitting proudly in the sky like a watchful protector. These forms weren't just aesthetic changes. They hinted at the deeper connection between these Pokémon and the primal forces they represented. Unovan scholars interpreted the Therian forms as reflections of the elements themselves, suggesting that these legendary beings could shift into pure embodiments of the weather when nature demanded it. Not far from their tales is that of Kyurem, one of Unova's most haunting mysteries. Reshiram and Zekrom's stories are filled with warmth, loyalty to their original heroes, bonds forged through ideals, truth, and unity. Kyurem's story, by contrast, feels like a shadow cast by ancient loss. According to Unovan myth, it is the husk left behind after the original dragon split, a creature of absence rather than presence. Villagers in Lacanosa town feared Kyurem not because it attacked, but because it lingered, a silent, hollow wanderer that chilled the night air. Their tradition of building high walls and staying indoors after dark wasn't about panic. It was a precaution passed down generation to generation, as though the memory of Kyurem's sorrow never fully faded from their collective memory. Even today, some elders still leave small bowls of warm water near their doors during winter, believing the gesture comforts wandering spirits suffering from cold. What makes the Unova legendary roster so rich is the contrast between philosophies. While the Tau trio reflects ideological conflict, the Swords of Justice reflect moral conviction. Terrakion's strength, Cobalion's leadership, Virizion's grace, and Keldeo's youthful courage make them one of the most purpose-driven legendary groups in Pokémon history. They aren't gods or ancient beings shaped by creation myths. They're protectors who stood against human cruelty during the earliest days of Unovan settlement. Their story is grounded in compassion and resistance, a reminder that legends are formed not only from cosmic events, but from individuals making profound choices. Travelers in Pinwheel Forest still whisper that if one listens carefully during the quiet hours of dusk, they might hear Virizion's footsteps brushing gently against the leaves, or Terrakion's low voice echoing against the stone. Terrakion's lore holds a powerful sense of duty. It is said to have shattered walls to save Pokémon trapped by human encroachment, breaking through fortifications that settlers mistook as safe. Virizion acted through elegance rather than force, using its speed to appear between conflicts before the first blow landed. And Cobalion, the leader, guided both Pokémon and humans toward understanding. Its calm steel presence inspired peace, not fear. These stories remind Unovans that conflict isn't always solved through sheer power. Sometimes it's through wisdom, patience, and restraint. Keldeo, the youngest, carries the legacy of learning from them all, embodying growth and hope. Its transformation into its resolute form symbolizes the moment it stops running from its fears and starts carrying its purpose with pride. One of the most intriguing aspects of Unova's legends is how deeply they're tied to specific locations. Dragon Spiral Tower, for example, is more than a mysterious ruin. It's the oldest known structure in Unova, standing tall before the kingdom split, before the legends divided, before history became myth. The tower's age is so great that even modern architects cannot fully explain how it remains standing. Its spiral form resembles the skeletal remains of an ancient dragon or the coiled ascent toward truth itself. Scholars believe Zekrom and Reshiram once perched there, sensing the emotions of the kingdom below. Even today, the wind around the tower feels different, heavier, quieter, charged with the remnants of a truth too old to fully understand. Lacunosa Town's relationship with Kyurem provides one of the most emotionally resonant pieces of Unova's lore. Their stories describe nights colder than any winter, when a silhouette wandered fields of frost, searching for warmth it could no longer feel. They claimed Kyurem's body creaked like frozen branches, and that its breath could turn the ground into ice. Yet despite the fear embedded in those stories, the people of Lacunosa never described Kyurem with hatred, only sorrow. Their traditions of warmth, whether keeping fires lit late into the night or leaving bowls of hot water outdoors, grew not from fear of attack, but from the desire to soothe a lonely creature suffering from a fate it didn't choose. That compassion reflects one of Unova's central themes, understanding even those who frighten us. Then there is the story of the original dragon, a legend shared across every corner of Unova. According to ancient lore, the dragon embodied both truth and ideal in perfect unity. It supported two brothers who ruled the region in harmony, their beliefs separate but balanced. But when the brothers eventually disagreed, the dragon split, unable to embody conflicting visions simultaneously. From this split came Reshiram and Zekrom, each carrying one side of the original harmony, while Kyurem remained behind as an empty vessel. This myth has become deeply symbolic across Unova. Students learn about it not merely as a historical tale, but as a reflection of the consequences of division and the possibility of reconciliation. Even the smallest details of these legends carry weight. For example, ancient carvings in the Nakreen Museum depict a dragon with opposing halves, one swirling like fire, the other jagged like lightning. Another carving shows a third shape collapsing inward, as though frozen mid-movement. These artworks suggest that the story was passed down long before modern retellings, shaped by generations who witnessed events far different than the polished myths we know now. And that's part of the magic of Unova's legendary Pokémon. Their stories feel like living history, not distant lore, as though the air itself remembers their presence. Unova's Sky Arrow Bridge, though a modern landmark, stands as a reminder of the region's dual nature. innovation rooted in ancient belief. Legends say that during construction, unusual winds swept across the river, strong enough to alter cranes and machinery. Workers joked that Tornadus was testing their resolve. Others believed Landorus watched quietly from the clouds, ensuring harmony was maintained. Of course, none of that can be proven, but in Unova, superstition and admiration often coexist without conflict. The people love their legends not because they need them to be real, but because they represent the heart of the region. The relationship between humans and legendary Pokémon in Unova is complex, often marked by caution rather than worship. Unlike other regions where legendaries serve as gods or ancient rulers, Unova's legends feel more like mirrors. Their stories reflect human emotions, choices, and regrets. They're not distant celestial beings. They're symbols of ideals made tangible, and that makes their lore feel more intimate. When Unovans tell stories of Reshiram's flames, they talk about clarity and honesty. When they speak of Zekrom's lightning, they talk about ambition and drive. When they whisper Kyurem's name, they speak of loss and the courage to face emptiness. All of these threads weave together into a tapestry that defines Unova's mythic identity. Its legendary Pokémon aren't simply creatures of power. They are storytellers, philosophers, guardians, and reminders. Every city has a tale, every landmark a legend, every person a belief tied to one of the beings who shaped their world. And as night settles across the region, quiet winds roll through the plains, perhaps carrying with them the distant echoes of these ancient myths, whispers of lightning, fire, frost, and wind, telling their stories over and over to anyone willing to listen. Unova's legendary Pokémon are woven into the region's identity so completely that even small details of their lore echo through everyday life. The deeper you go into the stories surrounding these beings, the more it becomes clear that Unova doesn't just have legends. It remembers them, preserves them, and lets them shape the rhythm of the region's history. Every ruin, every tower, every forgotten path seems touched by events older than living memory, and the legendary Pokémon tied to those events feel as if they're still watching from the edges of the world, influencing the present through silence alone. Reshiram and Zekrom continue to anchor the region's central myth, but as Unova expanded and rebuilt after the ancient war that split truth and ideals, other forces began to rise into prominence. Beings like Kyurem, who lingered in their empty solitude, and the forces of nature, whose temperaments shaped the skies and seasons. Each of them stands apart, yet all of them form a constellation of stories that define the character of Unova. And nowhere is this more evident than in the lingering traces of Kyurem's legend scattered throughout the frozen outskirts of Lacanosa town. The people of Lacanosa have always lived with a quiet understanding. The cold holds memories, and some of them are best left undisturbed. The massive chasm near the town, an unnatural scar on the landscape, has long been treated as sacred ground, a boundary between the known and the unknown. According to the oldest oral traditions, this is where the husk of Kyurem fell from the sky after Reshiram and Zekrom split apart. The crash site scarred the land so deeply that the soil never fully healed, as if the earth itself remembers the impact of a legend breaking. Even today, locals speak in hushed voices about strange glimmers in the snow, or sudden drops in temperature on perfectly clear nights, as if something still stirs beneath the frozen crust. Kyurem's presence feels different from other legendaries. Where Reshiram and Zekrom embody powerful ideals, Kyurem embodies absence, the silence left behind when two forces that were once whole fracture. It has no divine mission, no moral arc, no agenda. It simply exists as the reminder of what was lost. Its emptiness isn't a flaw, it's part of its identity. Even in its dormant state, Curum radiates a cold that feels less like weather and more like memory, a stillness that freezes everything except the truth it guards. Trainers who explore the giant chasm often describe the air as heavy, as though the place itself holds its breath the moment you step into its shadows. Unova's forces of nature tell a different kind of story, one shaped not by ancient wars, but by seasons, storms, and the pulse of nature itself. Tornadus, Thundurus, and Landorus are legendary more for their direct impact on people's lives than for any ancient civilizations. The region's earliest farmers believed Landorus to be the benevolent anchor of the trio, the guardian who soothed the land after Tornadus's destructive winds and Thundurus's crackling storms. Even now, stories persist of fields ruined by unexpected gales, only to be mysteriously healed after sightings of Landorus gliding quietly above the clouds. These stories became part of Unova's agricultural identity. During planting season, some rural communities still perform symbolic gestures toward Landorus, small stacks of harvested grain or stones arranged in spiral shapes, not out of superstition, but respect. Tornadus and Thundurus, on the other hand, occupy a place somewhere between fear and reverence. People don't worship them, but they acknowledge their power, the way sailors fear the sea, not because it hates them, but because nature follows its own rules. Even modern meteorologists have adopted terminology derived from the trio's lore, describing unpredictable early spring storms as tornadus fronts and sudden, violent thunderstorms as thundurus bursts. And then there is Meloetta, the quiet artist of the region, a being whose influence is subtle but intimately felt. Where other legendaries shape the physical world, Meloetta shapes the emotional one. It is said that the region's early culture, especially its music and architecture, was influenced by encounters with Meloetta wandering through plazas and open-air theaters. Its songs could shift moods, turning conflict into understanding, sorrow into healing. When it was harmed during one of Unova's ancient conflicts, the legend says Meloetta lost its voice and hid itself away, leaving the region to mend its own divisions. The return of its melody is often interpreted as a sign that Unova's spirit is whole again, a metaphor woven into plays, music festivals, and even the grand designs of the musical hall in Nimbasa City. The Swords of Justice, Cobalion, Terrakion, Virizion, and their newer companion Keldeo occupy a unique place in Unova's collective memory, their legend tethered directly to compassion rather than cosmic power. Unlike many legendaries, whose origins are shrouded in riddles, the Swords of Justice emerged as defenders of the innocent during times of war and disaster. Their story is surprisingly grounded. They protected the weakened, sheltered the vulnerable, and used their strength not to conquer, but to preserve life when humans lost control of their own destruction. This gave them a moral authority unlike any other trio or quartet in the Pokémon world. Guardians defined not by divine birth, but by deliberate choice. Cobalion, the leader, embodies unwavering resolve, the immovable pillar that keeps the group aligned with justice. Terrakion represents endurance, the force that breaks through walls to rescue those trapped by devastation. Virizion symbolizes agility and protection, shielding the defenseless like a silent emerald flash. And Keldeo, the youngest, represents growth, the idea that heroism can be learned and earned through understanding rather than power alone. Together they form a legend not of creation or destruction, but of responsibility. It's no wonder Unova's most compassionate communities still reference them in ceremonies celebrating new guardians, peacekeepers, and leaders. Even beyond these major legendaries, Unova's world is full of overlooked myths that enrich the region's story. Hidden beneath the bustle of its large cities are small details hinting at deeper connections. For instance, certain ornate tiles embedded in Castelia City's walkways depict stylized clouds and currents, subtle references to Tornadus and Thunderous, calming the region's ancient coastline before modern engineering took over. In Driftvale City, the design of the market stalls pays homage to the swords of justice, with wooden carvings representing resilience and solidarity. And while Unova is perhaps the most modernized region in the world, its architecture is often influenced by the same forces that shaped its mythology. The Skyarrow Bridge, for example, is rumored by some historians to be constructed along an ancient wind path associated with Tornadus. Whether or not the rumor is true, the symbolism is unmistakable. A bridge that harnesses the rhythm of the winds to unify two sides of the region mirrors Tornadus's chaotic nature, finally brought into harmony. The ruins of Unova also whisper about lesser-known legendary influences. Deep within certain ancient chambers, patterns resembling Meloetta's musical lines appear on cracked stone, suggesting entire cultures once centered their rituals around music. In other areas, carvings of symmetrical dragons, long before the distinction between truth and ideals, indicate the era before Reshiram and Zekrom split. These depictions, symmetrical and complete, represent a time when harmony existed not as an aspiration, but as a reality. Their symmetry is eerie now, knowing what eventually became of that singular dragon. Unova has always been a region of contrasts: tradition versus innovation, nature versus civilization, truth versus ideals. Those contrasts are not weaknesses, they are its personality. The legendary Pokémon here don't represent a single theme, but the entire emotional spectrum of a region constantly in motion. And the more one examines their stories, the more it becomes clear that Unova is not defined by its past battles or divine beings, but by the way humans and Pokémon alike have continued to rebuild, reinterpret, and reconnect with the legends that shape them. Somewhere out there, Tornadus still rides the atmosphere's currents in spirals of wind. Thundurus still crackles with stored storm energy across distant thunderheads. Landorus still watches over the land, unseen but felt wherever the earth grows fertile. Meloetta's song still drifts faintly across festival nights when the air is warm enough to carry distant echoes. The swords of justice still travel unseen through wilderness, ensuring no destruction repeats the mistakes of the past. And deep beneath layers of frost and silence, Kyurem still waits, empty yet complete, still holding the ancient fracture between truth and ideals that shape the region's soul. Unova's legends don't fade. They settle like dust, like snow, like melody, quiet but ever-present, reminders that every part of the region's modern life has roots far deeper than anyone realizes. And just as the night sky holds every storm, every melody, every dragon's breath that once shaped Unova, the region continues to live in the shadow and light of its legendary Pokémon, finding peace in the stories that still linger across its forests, plains, mountains, and frozen chasms. Among all the legends woven into Unova's history, few feel as quietly interconnected as the stories that surround the many mythical and legendary Pokémon scattered across its sprawling landscapes. As the region continued to grow, its lore expanded beyond the original dragon trio and began to take on new shapes, stories carved into stone, whispered through forests, and etched into myths that traveled far beyond Unova's borders. The more you look into the region's tapestry of legends, the more uncanny connections you find, each one layering the world with a sense of depth that seems to breathe beneath the cities and plains. Unova has always been a land where human ambition meets natural wonder, and its legendary Pokémon are the living reflections of that tension, remnants of ancient eras still watching silently as the world moves forward. To understand Unova's legendary families is to understand how deeply themes of balance define the region. Even minor myths connect back to the idea that conflict and harmony exist side by side. You see this not just in the famous Divide Dragons or the forces of nature, but in nearly every legendary that emerged from the region's stories. Some protect harmony, others test it, and some simply observe it. As centuries passed, people began interpreting these beings not as deities or rulers, but as symbols, living embodiments of the forces that shaped their history. And because Unova's history is so closely tied to human progress, its legends naturally explore what happens when humans push too far, or when nature responds to that push with its own quiet power. The forces of nature, Tornadus, Thundurus, and Landorus, are some of the clearest examples of this. While earlier parts explored their relationships with weather and land, another fascinating layer of their mythology lies in how ancient civilizations tried to understand them. Long before Unova had large cities, early villages constructed shrines made of clay and stone. Storm patterns carved by Tornadus were recorded not as destructive paths, but as sacred spirals reflecting change. Thunder strikes left by Thundurus were interpreted as divine warnings, not punishments. And Landorus, ever the stabilizing presence, was carved into talismans meant to protect crops from unpredictable seasons. Archaeologists believe early Unovan farming techniques, especially their soil restoration practices, were influenced by Landorus worship, a reminder that myth often drives innovation long before scientific understanding arrives. Reshiram, Zekrom, and Kyurem form another layer of Unova's poetic duality. While earlier sections of the script focused on their creation and symbolism, Unovan scholars have spent centuries debating the more metaphysical aspects of their existence. One theory suggests that Reshiram and Zekrom are not simply embodiments of truth and ideals, but reflections of human consciousness. When humans choose truth, Reshiram resonates more strongly in the world. When they choose ambition, Zekrom stirs. Kyurem, by contrast, is believed to embody detachment, a kind of silence where neither truth nor ideals dominate. This perspective paints the trio not as static forces, but as mirrors. They react to human behavior, not the other way around. And if that's the case, then their battles are not just clashes of energy, but collisions of thought. A force of belief meeting another force of belief, shaping the world in quiet, unseen ways. Kyurem's existence in particular raises questions that scholars still debate. While the common myth casts it as the leftover shell of the original dragon, some texts found near Giant Chasm imply something deeper, that Kyurem's emptiness is not a flaw, but a state of quiet observation. Its refusal to act unless threatened, its stillness in the freezing crater, and its resistance to being awakened unless one wields either truth or ideals suggests that Kyurem may represent neutrality in its purest form. In this interpretation, Kyurem doesn't oppose Reshiram or Zekrom. It simply waits, acting only when balance has tilted too far. To some ancient cultures, Kyurem was the most terrifying of the three, not because of power, but because of its silence, the idea that the world might reach such extreme imbalance that the husk awakens and chooses to intervene. Beyond these famous legends, Unova hides smaller, quieter myths, stories with less global consequence, but remarkable beauty. Take the legend of Cobalion, Terrakion, and Virizion. These three warriors stand at the heart of a folktale about courage that predates even Unova's recorded history. Their story is often told as a tale of rescue, where the trio defended Pokémon from human conflict, but in some lesser-known versions, their journey continues long after the war ends. They wander the world not as guardians of physical harm, but as wanderers seeking signs of unity. In these versions of the myth, the trio does not disappear after their historic battles. Instead, they intentionally remain hidden, watching from hillsides or forests to see how humans treat each other when no one is watching. This interpretation changes the tone of the trio entirely, transforming them from warriors of the past into ongoing observers of the present. Virizion's speed is often described with poetic exaggeration, outrunning wind, dancing through conflict without leaving a trace, but there's symbolic meaning behind these stories. Speed becomes a metaphor for intuition, the ability to sense conflict before it arises. Terrakion's strength, meanwhile, is not just physical. Ancient carvings depict it as a wall between the weak and the strong, a living reminder that true strength protects rather than dominates. And Cobalion's calm demeanor becomes a representation of wisdom, the oldest form of leadership, where violence is never the first choice, but always the last resort. Together, the trio embodies a moral lesson woven into Unova's history, a reminder that harmony requires courage, strength, and foresight in equal measure. The fourth member of their group, Keldeo, adds a more emotional layer to their legend. In many retellings, it symbolizes growth, the part of the story where the younger generation learns from the older. There's something universal about that idea, that legendary guardians themselves once needed training, guidance, and care. Keldeo's transformation into its resolute form becomes a metaphor for learning to stand for something, not just running from fear. Even its ability to walk on water carries symbolic weight, a message that belief can carry you through things that seem impossible. The trio's bond with Keldeo often resonates deeply with fans because it mirrors real life so closely. We all start inexperienced. We all learn from those who came before us, and we all eventually grow strong enough to continue on our own. Unova's nature-based legends also reveal how deeply the region respects equilibrium. Meloetta, for example, is a Pokémon shaped by music, a creature whose existence directly influences the emotional harmony of those around it. Ancient songs written about Meloetta are unusual because they don't describe it as a distant deity. Instead, they portray Meloetta as a companion of wandering bards, a partner in creativity rather than a being of worship. This suggests a culture where legends weren't always revered through temples. Sometimes they were celebrated simply through art, through dancing, singing, traveling, and storytelling. Even Meloetta's forms reflect this dual nature, the melody that inspires peace and the dance that inspires courage. Both forms are needed to maintain harmony, just as both silence and sound shape music. Another overlooked Unova myth involves Victini, the victory Pokémon. While people often focus on its association with energy and triumph, few consider the implications of a being said to bring victory to those who befriend it. Early Unovan philosophers debated whether Victini actually grants victory, or if its presence simply enhances motivation, confidence, and clarity, qualities that naturally increase one's chance of success. Some argued that Victini was not a creature of luck, but a creature of mindset. Its flames symbolized internal fire rather than external fortune. If this interpretation is true, then Victini's real power lies not in giving victory outright, but in awakening potential within others. That perspective transforms Victini from a mythical prize into an ally of self-belief, a comforting idea for a region defined by resilience. Then there is the story of the Swords of Justice and their relationship with the forests and plains they once protected. Many trainers forget that their home, the Moor of Isirus, is rich with ancient symbolism. Murals found there depict the trio standing with Pokémon of all shapes and sizes, Deerling, Patrat, Ducklet, all united beneath a single flowing pattern of wind and grass. This imagery suggests that the trio did not act alone. They stood as leaders of entire ecosystems, not just solitary warriors. The idea of legendary Pokémon existing within communities rather than above them is one of the most unique aspects of Unova lore, highlighting a cultural belief that even the strongest belong to the world, not above it. Another quietly beautiful legend revolves around the Abyssal Ruins, the underwater labyrinth tied to ancient royalty. Many believe these ruins belong to the same civilization that worshipped Volcarona, though scholars continue to debate the connection. What is certain is that the ruins emphasize one of Unova's recurring themes. Civilizations rise and fall, but legendary Pokémon endure. The songs carved into the ruins describe a society fascinated by prophecy and balance. They depict kings seeking counsel from beings of flame and shadow, yet falling when they chased power instead of harmony. The ruins remain submerged, untouched by time, serving as reminders that even in a region of progress, history sleeps beneath the surface, waiting to be rediscovered. Unova's approach to legendary Pokémon sets it apart from other regions. Many of its legends aren't just cosmic or divine, they're personal. They reflect human choices, human emotions, and the human desire to grow. They aren't just stories of creation or destruction, they're stories of learning. Every legendary symbolizes something universal: truth, ideals, neutrality, protection, growth, balance, creativity, resolve. Together they form a kind of moral compass, guiding the region through centuries of change. And all across Unova, as the night settles and the modern world quiets down, these legends still linger in the air, in ancient stones, in dense forests, in frozen chasms, and in quiet plains bathed in moonlight. They remind people that even as cities rise and trains rumble and technology evolves, something ancient and enduring still walks alongside them. Something watching, waiting, and guiding the world toward harmony. Among all the regions in the Pokémon world, Unova stands apart for how deeply its legends are tied to human emotion, conflict, and the struggle for balance. As the stories unfold, each of the region's many legendary Pokémon reveals another layer of Unova's complicated history, a history shaped by unity, division, ambition, and hope. By the time you reach the later myths and records, you begin to understand why Unova's legendary roster feels unusually large and unusually interconnected. These beings weren't just symbols created to explain natural phenomena, they were reflections of the region's greatest strengths and weaknesses. And nowhere is this more evident than in the intertwined stories of harmony Pokémon like Meloetta, boundary Pokémon like Kyurem, and guardian-like presences such as Cobalion, Terrakion, Virizion, and their apprentice, Keldeo. Their lore paints a picture of a region constantly redefining itself, forged through eras of conflict and renewal. Meloetta's connection to Unova reveals a very different kind of legend than the elemental battles of the Tau Trio or the defensive stands of the Swords of Justice. Meloetta represents artistry, emotion, cultural identity, and the quiet power of creativity. It is said that long before Unova's cities rose into skylines of glass and steel, Meloetta wandered the land, singing melodies that shaped the culture itself. Its voice guided tribes, inspired early dances, and even calmed territorial disputes. Unlike many legends who intervene through raw power, Meloetta influences the world by altering hearts, using music as a harmonizing force. Some myths go so far as to claim that when Meloetta danced, the land itself responded, rivers shifting course slightly, plants blooming in rhythm, and winds swirling gently around it like partners in a performance. Meloetta's ability to change between its aria and pirouette forms symbolizes this dual nature: harmony and expression, elegance and boldness, softness and confidence. The Pokemon becomes a metaphor for how Unova grew from scattered settlements into a unified region through a shared artistic heritage. But while Meloetta soothed conflicts, Kyurem embodies the opposite, the aftermath of a world broken apart. Its lore continues to haunt researchers, suggesting that Kyurem is not simply a legendary dragon, but the hollowed shell left behind after an ancient catastrophe. Where Reshiram and Zekrom represent ideal and truth, Kyurem is the void that remained when the original dragon split. Residents of Lacunosa Town still cling to ancestral warnings about the icy monster that comes in the darkest nights, stealing away those foolish enough to wander. Though modern scholars debate the accuracy of these tales, they agree the fear came from somewhere real, perhaps the chilling aura Kyurem emits, an aura so cold it freezes the air into dust like frost. What makes Kyurem fascinating is that it exists in a state of incompleteness, almost yearning instinctively for the missing parts of itself. This longing becomes physically expressed in its ability to fuse with either of the other Tau dragons, forming White Kyurem or Black Kyurem. The fusion doesn't feel like dominance. It feels like Kyurem trying to remember what it once was. These forms radiate overwhelming power, but also a strange, melancholy sense of restoration, an echo of the original dragon's lost wholeness. Meanwhile, the Swords of Justice bring another element to the Unovan mythos, the idea of guardians who arise during human conflict to protect the innocent. Cobalion, Terrakion, and Virizion shaped Unova's geography and culture in subtle ways through their intervention in ancient wars. Each one represents a different response to struggle, leadership, force, and grace, and together they formed a protective triad. It was said that when the land burned, Terrakion smashed open escape routes through mountains. When people fled in fear, Virizion threw off attackers with movements too swift to follow. And when panic overtook villages, Cobalion guided survivors with an unbreakable calm. Their presence shaped Unova's understanding of justice, creating a legacy that still influences modern tales of heroism. Keldeo's inclusion in their ranks carries that story forward, showing how mentorship, compassion, and perseverance allow someone small and inexperienced to rise alongside legends. The fact that these guardian Pokemon chose Unova, of all places, as their territory reinforces how deeply the region's history is tied to cycles of conflict and protection. As Unova grew more complex, more densely populated, and more technologically advanced, the stories surrounding its legendary Pokemon evolved as well. Tornadus, Thundurus, and Landorus, the forces of nature, became symbols of environmental tension. Tornadus represents the destructive power of unrestrained storms, hurling gales that tear across the land. Thundurus crackles with lightning that scorches the ground, leaving blackened trails that farmers once feared. But Landorus stands apart as both mediator and caretaker, calming the other two and restoring harmony. Before Landorus intervened, historical accounts describe seasons of devastation, harvests destroyed, homes swept away, land cracked by lightning. When Landorus descended, the disasters slowed. He's still revered as a bringer of fertility, credited with shaping the soil that makes Unova so agriculturally rich today, especially around places like Humalau's coastlines or the plains near Opelucid. Though myths often exaggerate, farmers continue to leave offerings at shrines honoring him, hoping for good harvests. These stories reveal the core theme of the forces of nature, a balance between chaos and restoration, perfectly mirroring Unova's broader themes. Yet another triad, the lake guardians of Unova, Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf, though native to Sinnoh, still find echoes in Unovan storytelling due to migrations, cultural exchange, and shared lore about emotion, knowledge, and willpower. While they technically belong to another region, Unovan scholars have long noted the parallels between their symbolic roles and those of Meloetta or the Tau Trio, adding further depth to Unova's lore traditions. Historians point to ancient exchanges between early Sinnoh and Unova peoples, explaining why certain myths overlap or reference concepts seen in both regions. These culturally intertwined stories emphasize how Unova doesn't exist in isolation. Its legends breathe within a larger world. Then there is Genesect, a legend unlike any other in the region. Its existence bridges the oldest era and the newest, a fossil resurrected by Team Plasma and modified into a biomechanical weapon. This creates one of the most ethically complex stories in the Pokemon world. Genesect originated as a prehistoric predator, one so efficient that scientists believed nothing escaped its violet-hued armor or high-speed aerial chases. Resurrecting it should have been a scientific triumph. But Team Plasma's enhancements, especially the adaptable drive cannons on its back, turned Genesect into something far more dangerous. The conflict between its natural instincts and mechanical augmentation reflects one of Unova's deepest themes, the tension between human idealism and the unintended consequences of ambition. Even after escaping from Plasma's influence, Genesect struggled to find a place in a world that had changed around it, mirroring Kyurem's lonely existence or Mewtwo's similar struggle in Kanto. These legends form a connected narrative, beings reshaped by human hands, searching for identity in altered worlds. Among the smaller but equally profound Unovan myths are those surrounding Victini, a legendary Pokemon with the ability to generate infinite energy. While Victini often appears cheerful and small, its lore implies a degree of cosmic importance. Its presence is said to ensure victory for those who fight alongside it, yet no ancient Unovan source describes Victini as manipulative or dangerous. Instead, Victini embodies pure, hopeful energy potential in its truest form. When trapped in the remote lighthouse on Liberty Garden long ago, the island's isolation became symbolic of unused potential locked away by fear. Only when trainers rediscovered Victini did that energy return to the world. This tale, though short compared to others, fits Unova's themes beautifully. The idea that power becomes harmful only when suppressed or misused. Nowhere does Unova's mythic tapestry feel more intertwined than in the story of the original dragon, the being that once embodied harmony before splitting into Reshiram, Zekrom, and Kyurem. Scholars still debate the nature of the original dragon. Some believe it represented balance, resolving conflicts by reaffirming unity between brothers. Others say it represented potential truth, ideals, and emptiness woven into one. What makes the legend so powerful isn't just that the dragon split, but that it did so because of human disagreement. It wasn't a battle of monsters that created division, it was a battle of philosophy. This gives the Tau Trio one of the most human-driven mythologies in the Pokemon world. Their lore is not about cosmic cycles or ancient deities, it's about people, families, and ideals. When the brothers' arguments escalated, the dragon tore itself apart, embodying the consequences of conflict. In many ways, that myth stands as the emotional heart of Unova's entire legendary catalog. Unova's lore is so rich because it mirrors the world around it. Its cities, rural landscapes, and cultural mixing all reflect the same themes of unity, division, ambition, and healing found in its legends. The Pokemon themselves feel like characters who emerged from the land's emotional history, not just forces of nature or ancient guardians. Every story, from Meloetta's melodies to Kyurem's frozen solitude, from the swords of justice defending the weak to Genesec's engineered transformation, paints the region as one constantly balancing progress with consequence. That's what makes Unova unique. Its legends aren't just stories about past eras, they're mirrors held up to the present. And as you continue exploring these myths, the region becomes more than a place on a map. It becomes a living, breathing narrative, one where every city, route, and landmark carries echoes of legendary footsteps. Somewhere in an abandoned forest, Virizion still moves like wind through leaves. Somewhere in the highest storms, Tornadus shapes the sky. Somewhere in the frozen quiet of Giant Chasm, Kyurem waits, surrounded by a silence too deep to measure. And somewhere, in the heart of Unova, truth and ideals continue their eternal dance. Reshiram and Zekrom, watching from opposite sides of the sky, forever reminding the world that harmony must be chosen, not taken for granted. The legends of Unova continue to unfold like an ancient tapestry, each thread woven with stories of conflict, harmony, and forgotten eras that shaped the region long before humans ever built their first villages. And among these legends, few are as emotionally resonant as the stories tied to the Swords of Justice, a quartet whose actions during humanity's earliest expansions into the region have quietly defined the moral backbone of Unovan mythology. Their bond with the natural world was more than symbolic, it was an oath, a promise forged in a time when wildfires, territorial disputes, and the growth of early settlements threatened to destroy the Pokemon ecosystems that had existed peacefully for millennia. Cobalions' leadership, Terrakion's strength, Virizion's agility, and Keldeo's earnest determination represented four facets of protection, each responding to crisis in ways that reflected their distinct personalities. Over time, these Pokemon became the silent guardians of wilderness itself, appearing wherever imbalance threatened harmony. Their story has always felt more grounded than other myths, not a cosmic battle or a divine creation, but a tale of compassion, protection, and unity between species who learn to rely on one another. And perhaps it's this grounded nature that makes their lore so calming to explore at length, because their legend teaches that harmony isn't something granted from above. It's something living creatures choose to create, again and again, through action. Yet the Swords of Justice are only one piece of a much larger narrative tapestry. High above the region, in the cold, thin air where even the tallest towers of Castelia become like small blocks beneath distant clouds, another legend drifts without form. Tornadus, Thundurus, and Landorus, the forces of nature whose storm patterns shaped Unova's climate long before the region was charted. When these three roam, they don't behave like avatars of destruction, but like natural elements given personality, each embodying the chaotic motion of the atmosphere. Tornadus swirls through the sky like a wandering cyclone, tracing patterns that predict seasonal wind shifts. Thundurus carries the weight of storm energy, trailing bolts across the heavens like living veins of electricity that pulse in rhythm with the sky itself. And Landorus, often called the Guardian of Fields, binds the fierce energy of the other two into something productive, turning storms into fertile soil, wild winds into seasonal rains, and lightning into enriched farmland. Farmers throughout Unova still whisper thanks to Landorus in subtle ways, leaving small offerings near crop edges or quietly standing beneath the stars before planting, hoping that their fields will be visited not by wrath, but by gentle blessing. That balanced chaos controlled by compassion is the core theme of the forces of nature story, and it's reflected in the calmness of their presence whenever they appear in Therian form, drifting more like spirits than storms. As you move through the region's countless myths, you eventually reach the heart of all Unovan ideology, the twin dragons, who represent truth and ideals, and the third dragon, who represents the fragile balance between them. The story of Reshiram and Zekrom has always resonated because it feels profoundly human. Two brothers, united in vision, part ways when their convictions diverge, each calling forth a dragon that perfectly reflected their internal struggle. One heart burned for truth, Reshiram's flames, igniting clarity and honesty in even the most clouded minds. The other pursued ideals, Zekrom's thunder strengthening resolve and ambition. Their clash wasn't an apocalyptic struggle between good and evil. It was a philosophical disagreement made manifest, a reminder that the greatest battles often come from within families, between people who once shared everything. And in the aftermath of that conflict came Kurem, a silent, empty shell, the remnant of the original dragon that split into two. Kurem isn't portrayed as malevolent in ancient stone carvings or village stories. Instead, it's seen as lonely, incomplete, a being who lost its purpose when the unity it once embodied fractured. This emotional lens transforms Kurem from a fearsome creature of ice into something far more poignant, a symbol of unresolved conflict, of the pieces left behind when unity breaks, wandering not to harm, but to remember. Kurem's connection to the giant chasm deepens this sense of isolation. That forested crater, where cold hangs perpetually in the air and frost clings to branches even in the peak of summer, feels like a frozen memory in physical form. Villagers near Lacunosa town pass down stories of a creature who visits only at night, its presence chilling the air and sending wildlife into uneasy silence. It's easy to misinterpret those tales as warnings, but in context, they read more like laments, a collective wish that the dragon wandering the woods might someday find what it lost. The sparse text found in the abandoned laboratories of the region suggests researchers believed Kurem contained genetic remnants of both Reshiram and Zekrom, hinting that the split was not total, that maybe the dragon that once united truth and ideals still echoes faintly inside the icy shell. If that's true, then Kurem's story becomes one not just of emptiness, but of potential, an unanswered question waiting in the heart of a frozen crater. The ruins scattered across Unova reinforce the idea that the region's legends weren't isolated events, but interconnected waves of history. The relic castle, buried beneath desert sands, holds imagery of Unovan kings surrounded not by armies, but by symbols of dragons, storms, and natural forces, suggesting that rulers of old based their philosophies around the balance of extremes. The abyssal ruins, hidden beneath the ocean near Undella Bay, contain inscriptions in an indecipherable script that mention ancient kings, wealth beyond measure, and a great disaster tied to arrogance and power. Though the meaning remains unclear, many scholars believe these cryptic messages were warnings to future leaders about relying too heavily on legendary Pokémon for control. Even the Dream Yard, cracked and overgrown by nature, hints at the consequences of human ambition when it outruns wisdom. The energy found in the Dream Mist, sometimes produced by Musharna, was believed to blur the line between reality and imagination, revealing how fragile the divide between dreams and truth truly is. When viewed through this lens, the region's various myths begin to form a single narrative, that Unova's history is an unending cycle of searching for balance. Even Meloetta, the elegant melody Pokémon associated with art, emotion, and cultural memory, fits into this idea of balance. Its pirouette dances were not simply performances, they were rituals meant to stabilize emotional energy across the land. Ancient musicians believed Meloetta could soothe conflict through song, aligning the hearts of listeners with a sense of harmony that resonated beyond language. When Meloetta lost its voice in legends, the world seemed to lose its balance in small but noticeable ways, reinforcing the belief that beauty itself holds power over chaos. The fact that Meloetta has both an aria forme and a pirouette forme further reflects Unova's recurring theme of duality: emotion and action, beauty and bravery, serenity and motion, all represented in a single, gentle Pokémon whose melodies still linger in the dreams of performers. The idea of entire regions being shaped by legendary Pokémon continues with Genesect, whose lore sits at the intersection of ancient history and human intervention. Long before humans developed advanced technology, the ancient Pokémon that would later become Genesect dominated prehistoric ecosystems with unmatched predatory efficiency. When Team Plasma discovered its fossilized remains, they attempted to revive and enhance it, not to create chaos, but to showcase their ideology of liberation through power. The scientists who augmented Genesect with advanced weaponry and a propulsion system may have acted with misguided intentions, but their story illustrates one of Unova's oldest lessons. When humans interfere with history instead of learning from it, imbalance follows. And yet, in the present day, Genesect is often portrayed less as a danger and more as a lonely artifact, a Pokémon trying to find purpose in a world that no longer resembles the era it belonged to. Its buzzing wings echo like memories when it flies past city lights, its silhouette blending the ancient and the modern, reminding the region that progress carries consequences. Even the seemingly small details of Unova's lore, the seasonal migrations of legendary Pokémon, the subtle weather changes attributed to their presence, the faint music heard near certain ruins at night reflect a world alive with history. Unova is a region defined by contrast: ancient temples buried beneath deserts and modern cities built from glass, dragons of cosmic philosophy and guardians of natural ecosystems, mythic beings created through belief and technological legends revived from fossils. And yet all these stories blend seamlessly into a single, gentle narrative when told slowly and calmly. They become reminders that history is layered, that peace is fragile but persistent, and that every legend exists because someone took the time to observe, remember, and retell. And as the night settles over Unova, it becomes easy to imagine the region in stillness. Reshiram's warm flame flickering somewhere beyond the clouds, Zekram's thunder humming quietly in distant skies, Kyurem standing alone in its frozen crater, the swords of justice watching silently from forest shadows, and Meloetta's forgotten melodies drifting faintly through old ruins. Each legend sleeping, each myth breathing softly, each story patiently waiting to be rediscovered by anyone willing to listen. The world of Unova grows quieter as night settles over its vast landscapes, and in that quiet, the full depth of the region's legendary history becomes clearer than ever. Unova is a place defined by dualities, truth and ideals, nature and technology, unity and conflict. But beneath all its contrasts lies a foundation of balance. The legendary Pokémon that shape this region are not isolated myths, but interconnected forces, each watching over a different thread of Unova's existence. Even long after their stories faded into distant memory, their presence still lingers like soft echoes in every forest, every mountain, and every corner of the region touched by time. To understand Unova's legends is to understand the core of its soul, a soul carried quietly on the backs of dragons, spirits, and guardians who shaped every part of its identity. At the heart of Unova's ancient mythos stand the twin dragons who once were one, Reshiram and Zekrom, beings born from the same original dragon whose body split when two brothers could no longer agree on the path forward. The region's earliest civilizations viewed these two beings not as adversaries, but as necessary forces, each guiding different aspects of human ambition. Even in the modern day, when trainers encounter both of them, the feeling is unmistakable. Reshiram's warmth carries a quiet sincerity, the kind that pushes people to pursue truth without fear, while Zekrom's electricity hums with conviction, urging those who feel strongly about their beliefs to realize them fully. These dragons don't dictate which path is correct. They encourage humanity to examine itself, to understand what it stands for before acting. Their existence alone represents one of the most mature pieces of lore in the Pokémon world. The idea that conflict doesn't arise from evil, but from differing visions of what is right. Kyurem, the hollow remnant of the original dragon, remains perhaps the most mysterious figure in all of Unova. Legends describe it as an empty shell, a body missing the warmth and meaning that once filled it. Yet its role in the world is far from tragic. Kyurem's existence represents the aftermath of division, the quiet void left when harmony fractures. Researchers who study it describe feeling a strange calm in its presence, a stillness that borders on silence. Kyurem isn't incomplete because it is broken. It is incomplete because it is waiting. The dragon's ancient origin isn't a story of loss, but a story of potential. A reminder that when people heal divisions, something greater can be made from what remained hollow. Even in its stark coldness, Kyurem symbolizes the possibility of reunification, carrying ancient memories of a time when Unova's greatest force was whole. While the Tau Trio forms the philosophical spine of Unova's mythology, the region's connection to nature is embodied by another trio, the forces of nature. Tornadus, Thundurus, and Landorus represent wind, lightning, and the earth itself, each tied to the balance of the natural environment. Tornadus carries the endless freedom of airflow, capable of changing the climate of entire regions with the beat of its wings. Thundurus represents raw, disruptive energy, the lightning that tears through calm skies with unpredictable intensity, and Landorus stands between them as the mediator, bringing stability wherever conflict arises. Its presence is tied to harvests and fertility, and ancient farmers worshipped it as the guardian who kept storms in check so their fields could flourish. These three beings aren't simple weather Pokémon. Their lore tells the story of how people learned to respect nature's power, recognizing that destruction and renewal are both necessary parts of the world's cycle. Even beyond these major figures, Unova houses legends that shape the region on more intimate levels. The Swords of Justice, Cobalion, Terrakion, Virizion, and Keldeo stand as protectors, not of celestial balance, but of the innocent. Their story is grounded not in dragons or cosmic forces, but in empathy. When humans once caused devastating harm to Pokémon habitats, these four warriors appeared to shield vulnerable Pokémon from danger. Their bond is forged not through power, but through compassion, with Cobalion representing leadership, Terrakion embodying strength in defense, Virizion carrying the grace needed to protect without causing harm, and Keldeo learning from all three. Their lore reflects one of Unova's most human lessons, that protection is a duty earned, not taken. They weren't born as legends. They became legends because they chose to stand up when they were needed most. Then there is Meloetta, whose existence ties together Unova's cultural and emotional identity. Music has always played an important role in Unova, and Meloetta's melodies were said to shape the land itself. Some towns believe their architecture was inspired by the patterns heard in Meloetta's songs, while others say ancient conflicts ended because its voice soothed even the most hardened hearts. The transformation between its aria and pirouette forms reflects the duality of emotion, the calm introspection of song, and the passionate expression of dance. Meloetta isn't a legendary Pokémon in the traditional sense of shaping the world through force. Instead, it shapes hearts and communities, proving that harmony can influence a region every bit as powerfully as thunder or flame. Victini, a symbol of boundless victory, remains one of Unova's most uplifting legends. Said to grant strength and confidence to any who form a bond with it, Victini represents hope at its purest, not through unstoppable power, but through the belief that success is possible. Its lore is intentionally simple, a counterbalance to Unova's heavier themes of truth, ideals, and conflict. Victini embodies the energy that fuels all beginnings, the spark that drives someone to try, no matter how difficult the path might be. Even today, trainers who speak of Victini describe feeling warmth and encouragement simply by imagining it. It is the reminder that hope itself is a legendary force. Unova's deepest mysteries stretch into the ruins and forgotten places scattered across the region. The abyssal ruins whisper of a lost civilization far older than the modern Unova Empire, with ancient text hinting at a kingdom swallowed by the ocean and preserved in shimmering halls beneath the waves. The ruins' gold-plated floors and crystalline designs carry an aesthetic unlike anything else in the region, suggesting technological and artistic knowledge long erased by time. Some believe these people worshipped waterborne entities, while others suspect a link to the region's early dragon culture. Whatever the truth, the abyssal ruins remain one of the Pokémon world's greatest unanswered questions, a city frozen in silence, its knowledge sealed behind walls of the sea. The Relic Castle, buried beneath the desert resort, tells a different kind of story, one of ambition and collapse. Built by a civilization obsessed with power, the castle's spiraling chambers and shifting sand traps were once part of a massive complex designed to control ancient energies. Yet for all their ingenuity, the people who created it eventually vanished, leaving behind only dust and echoes. The legends say they attempted to harness a force too great for their hands, and were undone by their own reach. Even today, walking through its underground halls feels like stepping through time, as though the sand itself preserves the memory of their collapse. Their story stands as a silent reminder that even the strongest civilizations can fall when their ambition outpaces their wisdom. The Dragon Spiral Tower remains Unova's most ancient standing structure, and its origins go back so far that scholars can only speculate about who built it. Its layered architecture, twisting stones, and impossible height suggest knowledge far beyond what early humans should have possessed. Some believe the original dragon, the one that later split into Reshiram, Zekrom, and Kyurem, once roosted at its peak. Others think the tower was constructed to mimic the shape of a dragon ascending to the sky, a tribute meant to honor the being that guided Unova's people during their earliest days. Even in the modern era, standing at the base of the tower fills people with a sense of awe, as if they're standing before the birthplace of all Unovan mythology. The air around it feels heavier, quieter, as though the legends embedded in its stones still breathe. Unova's connection to its legendary Pokémon extends beyond ancient ruins. Even in bustling cities like Castelia and Nimbasa, The influence of these beings echoes in modern culture. Public murals depict the twin dragons in sweeping arcs of light and shadow. Statues of the swords of justice stand in small parks, reminders of courage and compassion. Performances in Nimbasa's theaters occasionally reenact Meloetta's tales, blending song and story in a way that honors its legacy. Even Victini appears in small charms sold in markets, symbols of good fortune often gifted to travelers setting off on long journeys. Unova is a region where mythology doesn't feel distant. It breathes alongside the people who still believe in it. Perhaps the most powerful theme running through all of Unova's legendary lore is the idea that conflict does not always destroy, sometimes it transforms. The story of the twin dragons doesn't end with division, it ends with the potential for reunification. The forces of nature don't end their disputes through domination, they find balance through Landoris. The swords of justice do not rely on strength alone, they rely on empathy. Meloetta turns discord into art. Victini turns fear into courage. Even Kyurem, the emptiest of the legends, waits quietly as a symbol that wholeness can be rebuilt when the world is ready. Unova teaches that legends are not stories about gods ruling from above, but about forces walking alongside humanity, sometimes guiding, sometimes warning, always connected. Its mythology is not about perfection. It's about understanding, not about power, but purpose. And when the stories are woven together, they reveal a region shaped not by one great being, but by many, each contributing a different kind of wisdom. As nighttime deepens in the Unova region, the ancient truths behind its legends settle into the world like soft dust. The ruins grow still, the forests hum with ancient memory, and the mountains watch over everything with silent patience. Even now, somewhere in the frozen distances of the giant chasm, Kyurem rests in its hollow quiet. Somewhere in the clouds, Tornadus and Thundurus trace their eternal paths. Somewhere in the sky's reflection, Landorus watches over the land it protects. Somewhere in a forgotten chamber, Meloetta's faint melody still echoes. Somewhere deep beneath the earth, ancient civilizations sleep beneath the sea and sand. And somewhere, high above all of it, the twin dragons wait, not to judge, not to fight, but simply to remind the world of the importance of what lies between truth and ideals. Unova's legends continue not because they demand belief, but because they offer understanding. And for those who seek peace in the quiet of night, their stories drift gently through the region like a soft breeze, ancient, wise, and endlessly patient,